I've been wanting to make a video on the Sternritter as a faction for a while now, exploring some of the issues I think Kubo ran into while creating and writing these characters, as well as looking at both the good and the bad of this final enemy faction in Bleach. I was inspired to finally make this video by a question posed on the Bleach subreddit not too long ago, which was basically asking, was it a mistake for Kubo to have 26 villains in the final arc of Bleach? I'm going to look at that question today and pose an answer to my question as well, which was what is the big problem with the Sternritter and why were some people so disappointed with these characters as villains as a whole? Before we begin, however, guys, I'm super close to 1,000 subscribers. We are going up every single day thanks to your support. If you're part of that percentage on my analytics that says you're not currently subscribed, hit the sub button and let's keep that number going up. I'd really appreciate it. We're so close to 1,000. If we can make that soon, that'd be fantastic. So thanks for all your help. Now, I wanted to start this video by clarifying a couple of things. If you know me at all, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of the Sternritter and the Reich as a concept in general. I think they were exactly the kind of villains Bleach needed for its final arc, in theory. The actual execution of the Sternritter on a whole is a different matter entirely, and it's something I hope to kind of tackle a little bit in this video. And before the video is over, I hope to have given you a definitive answer as to what I believe to be the fundamental flaw in the writing of the Sternritter that really kind of stopped them from achieving total greatness and kind of annoyed a lot of the fans in general. Let's begin, however, by answering that Reddit question, as I think that's a perfect place to begin. Was it inherently a mistake for there to be 26 plus villains in the final arc? My answer to that is simple: no. I don't think it was a mistake at all, and actually I think the complete opposite. I think it was exactly the right thing for Kubo to do, and there are a couple of reasons for that, despite how crazy it might seem. Kubo's solution to pushing the plot forward has always been to introduce more and more characters. It helps him write the story, it helps him flesh things out, and it helps him move the story forwards. And it feels like here with the final arc he did go a bit crazy. Obviously any organisation that categorises its fighters using the alphabet means there's going to be quite a lot of them on the roster, and I can immediately see some of the issues coming up to people's minds. Are all these characters going to be fleshed out? How is Kubo going to do justice to every single one of them? How many of these guys are just going to be nameless fodder? There's quite a lot of issues to be dealt with, but I don't think inherently it was a problem. The Reich are very clearly supposed to be the historical enemy of the Soul Society, and specifically the Gotei 13. They're supposed to be able to match the Gotei 13 and even surpass them in terms of military might, and that's why it makes sense for there to be so many top-tier enemies. The upper echelons of the Soul Society's military force are made up of captains and vice-captains, and together that equates to roughly 26 fighters, which makes perfect sense then why there would be that many Sternritters. And the same goes as well for the Espada. 10 Espada, 3 villainous captains leading the Espada, and then a bunch of Fraction spread out roughly across the ranks of the Espada, making for, again, a similar size fighting force. The difference here, of course, is that the Reich are supposed to be a unified army. They're supposed to be a military machine, unstoppable and relentless, matching the Gotei 13 then in terms of that kind of military organisation. So no, I don't think it was a mistake at all to have that many fighters. In fact, I think that's the perfect way to build this idea of a villain that can actually take on the Gotei 13, who quite frankly have spent the entire story being by far the dominant force in the manga so far. So if the sheer numbers wasn't the problem with the Sternritter, then what was? Well, I'll tell you right now, I think the big problem with the Sternritter was hierarchical distinction. Now, you might be thinking, what on earth does that mean? That sounds ridiculous, but I think it makes total sense once I explain it to you. Let's look once again at the Gotei 13. We have 13 captains, all of whom are pretty well developed for the most part. They all get a decent amount of screen time. Even characters like Ukitake, who don't really get to do a whole lot, are still well known by the fans. Then you have the vice captains. A lot of those guys get a decent amount of screen time again. Some of them are major characters, most of them are supporting characters, but for the most part, for characters befitting their rank, they all get a decent showing in the series. Moving over to the Espada, we have that same distinction. Each of the 10 Espada are given a good showing, and that includes the 3 villainous captains as well. They're all given a good showing. For the most part, we've got characters like Zamari, who are definitely pushed to the wayside. But for characters with the rank of Espada, they are all pretty much given a showing worthy of their name. As for the Fraction, again, Kubo did a pretty good job of showing these guys, but they were clearly given less time than the Espada, and that was fine. And that's where the issue lies. What people expect of the characters because of their rank. We don't go into Bleach expecting the vice captains to get as much time shown off as the captains. Just as when the Arankar were introduced, we didn't expect as much from the Fraction as we did from the Espada. And that's where the big problem for the Sternritter lies. There is no distinction between all of them until the Schutzstaffel arrive, but by that point it's far too late. Every single character in the enemy army is a Sternritter, and that means that that rank doesn't really mean anything. As far as we know, a Sternritter is a captain level enemy at least, and that's it. We don't get any kind of special treatment for these characters. Sternritters could be given a great showing or killed off in a single chapter, or killed off before they even appear on screen alive. And I think that is where the issues stem from. There is no distinction between these characters when clearly in Kubo's mind, certain Sternritter were always going to be more important than others. And I get the fan frustration, I experienced it myself. I clearly, wrongly, believed that a lot of these Sternritters would get more panel time and more development than they actually got. And I believe that because they are Sternritters, they are members of the Vandenreich's top tier. You get a character like Kang-Do, for instance, who has an amazing design, really cool look about him, cool personality. He steals a banker in the first invasion, and I'm like, okay, this guy's going to be a big deal, he's going to be really cool, and he's dead in like 3 chapters. And that really annoyed me. He gets no development, he gets no time to showcase his powers. But to Kubo, Kang-Do was clearly a Fraction level Sternritter. He was a vice captain level Sternritter. But it's impossible for us as readers to know that. Instead, we see this guy, we think he's a Sternritter, he's going to be fighting a captain, he's going to get a great showing, and he doesn't. He gets taken out as quickly as a Fraction would. And that's the problem with this distinction. There's also very little mythos around the Sternritter. The Sternritter as a concept get introduced immediately into the arc. There's no build-up to these characters whatsoever, and again, I get why Kubo did that. He wanted the arc to be full throttle from the very, very get-go, but it means that there's no chance to fear these characters. With the Espada, we were told quite gradually that Aizen might have 10 Vasto Lord level Arankar in his army, and that number would be enough to bring the downfall of Soul Society. And for a while, we only get to meet a couple of Espada, and yeah, we get to see their power. But the Espada were rolled out quite gradually throughout the arc. In the Thousand Year Blood War arc, we meet the top tier of the Sternritter pretty much immediately. I actually think that the Schutzstaffel was probably a pretty last-minute decision by Kubo to have a force that could assault the Royal Realm, and actually I think the Schutzstaffel were handled pretty well, but I think they arrived simply too late. Considering they were the top dogs of the Sternritter, I think they were given the appropriate amount of screen time and the appropriate amount of time with their fights. But I completely understand where fans of some of the other Sternritter were definitely left disappointed because their characters were put on the wayside because there was no distinction between, say, Kang-Do to Bazby. Bazby is given Espada or Captain level treatment in this arc. He has a lot of panel time, he has a couple of fights, he even gets a great backstory. Another character is Askin. Askin is given a hell of a lot of panel time, but there's no difference in rank between him and Nyanzul Weisel, who's killed off in literally a chapter. Askin only becomes a Schutzstaffel from chapter 599. Up until that point, he is a regular Sternritter, but he's treated with considerably more respect by Kubo than someone like BG9, who is dealt with immediately, or someone like Driscoll, who is literally given the fodder treatment that a Fraction would normally receive. And that's where the problem is. These guys in the Sternritter are all supposed to be incredibly powerful enemies, and yet some of them are given fodder treatment. They're given Fraction or Vice Captain level treatment, and I think that was always intentional in Kubo's head. Clearly, he had pinpointed some Sternritter he wanted to essentially give Captain level relevancy to. And I think we can kind of pinpoint who they are. Bazby, Askin, obviously Hashwolf, but then the Schutzstaffel as well. Then you've got characters like Gremmy, who get a pretty decent level fight, clearly supposed to be a Espada level enemy. But even Gremmy is literally only alive for the one volume he's actually in. Then you've got really, really popular characters like Kang-Do, BG9, some of the Femritters as well. Candice is clearly supposed to be a Vice Captain level Sternritter. You know, even though there's technically not that distinction there, that's what Kubo is thinking in his head. Characters again like Robert Akutrone, who are essentially thrown away to the wayside, maybe Kubo never intended for them to be a big deal. Although I do think Robert is a bit of a strange case. He was featured very heavily in the original invasion, and I think Kubo essentially just decided he wanted to make Lil the main gunslinger of the Sternritters, so Robert was kind of brushed aside. But yeah, that's what I believe to be the main problem with the Sternritter as a fighting force. Sternritters were being introduced one after the other at a pretty alarming rate at some points in that arc, and then they were just being killed off like that. The The 3 Sternritter that Kenpachi fought at the beginning of the arc, they don't even get to be seen alive on screen, but clearly they're supposed to be fraction-level Sternritters. They're supposed to be like the Tres Bestias when Yamamoto just one-shots them. You're not supposed to expect a big fight out of some of these characters. And yet I think myself and a lot of the fan base did expect a big fight from some of the characters who didn't get anything. And unfortunately, I think that those particular Sternritters were simply victims of the fact that Kubo labelled every single enemy in that army with the same term. Unfortunately, with the title of a Sternritter comes the expectations of a Sternritter. Kurge Opie was the first Sternritter we saw in battle, and he put up an amazing fight. He used Ranso Tengai, he used Sclavere, he basically decimated an entire just group of people in Hueco Mundo. It took Ichigo to defeat him with Urahara's help. And that sets a precedent that all of the Sternritter are going to be treated like this. When fighting Kurge, there was great emphasis placed on the fact that you might have to defeat them while they're swapping between Blute Vein and Blute Artery. And this kind of strategy, I think as readers, we expect it to be applied to every fight with the Sternritter. Unfortunately, fights like Soifon and BG9, Kubo clearly gave that kind of relevance. It's the same as Soifon versus Geovega. BG9 was never intended to be an Espada-level Sternritter, but unfortunately he is painted with the same brush because he has the same title. I think if Kubo had introduced the Sternritter and then given them, say, their own right-hand man or woman, say Basby was given the Sternritter moniker, but Kangdu was something else, obviously beneath the Sternritter, I think people would have been considerably less annoyed at the fact that he was shafted and defeated in literally a chapter. Same goes for characters like BG9. You could make Bambietta and Giselle a Sternritter, for instance, but then Candice and Menenas are this lower rank. And again, I think people would be less annoyed. If Nyanzel Weisel appears in the Royal Realm, but he's obviously not a Sternritter, it wouldn't matter so much that he was killed in one chapter. I don't think people would be that unhappy about it. As it stands, some Sternritter were clearly favoured over the others, and it just feels a bit weird because some people were attached to some Sternritter without realising that they would be treated as fodder. So that's it for this video, guys. Like I said, I think the big problem with the Sternritter was the fact that there was no distinction given to their hierarchy until the Schutzstaffel arrived, at which point it was too little, too late to salvage a lot of the Sternritter in the minds of the readers. But let me know what you think in the comments below, guys. Do you agree with what I said? Do you think that's the reason why the Sternritter disappointed a lot of people? Let me know in the comments below. And also, who do you think were the best and worst treated Sternritters? Of all the Sternritters, if you had to form an Espada, say, of 10 Sternritters, who would you pick? I think for me, it would have to be, obviously, Hashwolf, Basby, the 4 Schutzstaffel members, probably Asnot, probably Master Masculine, Giselle, Bambietta. That's my 10. I think it could be that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below what you think. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. See you then.